The left's posture on anything having to do with Republican proposals or criticisms in the wake of disastrous consequences from their policy choices, whether it's economic or of a law enforcement, national security perspective, everything's wacko, extremist. We don't have to deal with the merits of something specific you've suggested or proposed. We just dismiss it all as extremist or wacko because that satisfies our base. And because Republicans don't do a good enough job saying, oh, okay, right, it's extremist. Exactly which part of it is extreme? I'm a right-wing extremist. Relate to me my positions, specific positions. Give me a couple of examples that are extreme. A good example of this was over the weekend on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream, where California Democrat Socialist Congress being Ro Khanna was on, and the discussion was, of course, on the border. Here's what Ro Khanna said about the proposal that was passed by House Republicans, by McClintock and Diaz-Balart. They were the sponsors of legislation we mentioned last week to build a border wall, to increase border patrol, to do some of the things the left says it wants to do but doesn't really.
Their bill is extreme. Even the Senate won't pass their bill. I mean, their bill takes away funding from any of the NGOs in El Paso. You talk to Veronica Escobar, who represents that area. Why wouldn't we want NGOs giving water to people coming across or helping deal with the situation on the border?
Well, the reason we wouldn't want NGOs to receive federal funding is because, as been documented by the Heritage Foundation and other groups, many of these NGOs operating at the border in El Paso, which is in a state of emergency, duly represented by the wonderful Democrat Socialist Veronica Escobar, is because those NGOs have been facilitating illegal immigration. So why would we reward someone who is helping people break the law, who's aiding and abetting the influx of persons into this country illegally? Why would we reward them with federal funding? But you have to know what you're talking about in order to pin somebody like Ro Khanna down. Otherwise, they get away with this everything's extreme rhetoric. Everything coming from Republicans is extreme rhetoric. Same thing Joe Biden did. What did Joe Biden do with respect to the debt ceiling discussion and the provisions in the package that House Republicans passed, like a work provision for welfare benefits? Wacko. That was the term that Joe Biden used. It's wacko. Pay no mind to the fact that the welfare reform in the 90s, initiated by Midwestern Republican governors like John Engler and Tommy Thompson, was wildly successful with reducing welfare rolls, getting people back to work, and living independent lives. And frankly, even as recently as a few years ago with a Democrat governor in Arkansas, after there was a Medicaid expansion there, like we've seen in Illinois, that dwarfed the projected cost, the actual cost dwarfed the projected cost, Arkansas moved to a work provision for Medicaid coverage and saw a significant reduction in the Medicaid rolls because people went back to work, a lot of them did, and also got off the Medicaid rolls because they were making too much money to qualify. That's a happy occurrence. But for Democrats, it's a crisis when people get off the dole. You have to be specific, though, in order to deal with these individuals. And by the way, just on the debt ceiling piece, Financial Times reporting, the U.S. federal budget is hemorrhaging money. The nonpartisan CBO calculates that in the first 7 months of the 2023 fiscal year, underlying government revenues are down 10%, with spending up 12%. This leaves the federal budget deficit more than 3 times larger than in the same months of the 2022 fiscal year. But no worries, because the Biden team has some ill-defined plan to reduce deficits in year 15 of their 20-year imaginary, dreamy proposal. Meanwhile, House Republicans, who just want to go back to 2022 spending levels, what we were spending 5 months ago, and now we know, against the backdrop of revenues down 10% with spending up 12%, spending increases while your revenues go down. That's not wacko. And going back to spending levels from 5 months ago against this backdrop, that's wacko. You have to pin people down on the specifics in order to put them in the corner in which they should be put, to dismiss them as unserious people, or worse, as fraudsters, which they are. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Carol Roth, former investment banker and entrepreneur, also the author of You Will Own Nothing, Your War with a New Financial World and How to Fight Back. That is available for pre-order. It releases on July 18th. That sounds like a direct shot at the vaunted Klaus Schwab, You Will Own Nothing. Carol Roth, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be back with you guys. How are you this morning?
Good. Yeah, I mean, you're a messaging a maven in addition to being a financial analyst. What about getting people down on the specifics of these phrases that are bandied about that and repeated to the point of meaninglessness by politicians?
I mean, I think the challenge is between words and numbers. People like a good slogan, but math doesn't seem to be real high up on the things that people are good at. Unfortunately, financial literacy in our government-funded schools is not something that they decided was important, I'm assuming by design, so that they could continue to pass the kind of spending they have. It's really incredible because if you think about Joe Biden, back in 2011, when he was vice president, we saw a downgrading of our debt, of our U.S. debt. It was crazy. Our top-tier credit rating went away. The debt was downgraded. And the concern at that point in time was, I know this sounds a little laughable today, but, the level of our debt and obviously the growing deficits, and the level of the debt was at about 95% of GDP at that point in time. Right now, from a public debt standpoint, we're at something like 125%. So the fact that you had somebody who was the vice president at that time and saw the warning, that the ultimate black mark that you could possibly get on the financials of the country, and saying this is a dangerous situation, now coming out and being so cavalier, blowing up the spending to levels that just make your eyes want to sort of roll back. But as you said, from a messaging standpoint, it's very difficult to communicate that because people don't understand the numbers. And when you start talking about things like trillions of dollars, I just don't think that the average American can unfortunately get their head wrapped around it or understand what it means in their lives. I mean, these are the same people who voted to get, $1,000 or whatever it was in stimulus, and now have to pay thousands upon thousands of dollars in increased inflationary pressure, eroded the value of their purchasing power, and that will be permanent in their lives because they don't understand the trade-offs.
Yeah, I guess we need to do a better job of educating in lieu of the schools until there's more conservative reform and financial literacy inculcated in the schools. But I mean, I think people can understand. Let's see, revenues are down 10%, yet spending is up 12%. Does that make sense to you? Is that what you do when you bring in less money, you spend more?
I mean, certainly anybody who runs a household knows that's not a good thing. I like to show a chart, and you were talking about rolling back spending to 2022 levels. I like to show a chart that goes back even further. I mean, if we were to roll back spending to 2019 or, God forbid, 2018 levels, we would actually have a surplus and be able to start paying down some of the debt. We wouldn't be incurring additional financing costs, and we would actually be paying it down. And so, that, to me, if you should show those numbers and show how much we have grown in such a short period of time, it seems to be pretty obvious. I mean, you don't. The fact that the federal government gets between $4 and $5 trillion in quote-unquote revenue, aka your tax dollars, primarily each year, is insane. They shouldn't need a penny more. And so this idea that, we're not getting it or whatnot, I mean, that, to me, that should be the messaging. It's like, this is how much they already get. Like, they're cut off their allowance.
Well,
they don't need any more dollars.
And also, like, can you get a hold of yourself here? 2018, you're talking about 20. Was that the dark ages 5 years ago? Did we have running water and electricity and police and schools back in 2018? I think so. So, we need to sort of like do a better job of, I don't know, shaking people from this propaganda they're constantly fed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think part of the problem is that the crazy amount of spending and the deficits over time have been built on a bipartisan basis. Well, let's be honest.
Oh,
Certainly,
yeah.
the Democrats like to spend more, but now you've got the people who've been spendy all the time now trying to make cuts, and so it's one of those things that I'm super glad, I'm super proud that Kevin McCarthy was able to stick to his guns so far. We'll see how that ends up. But you really need to kind of say, well, we understand that we've been part of the problem, but now we want to be part of the solution, and here are the consequences. I don't think people really understand the consequences that we're on a fiscal runaway train that is not sustainable, and that it is going to derail if somebody doesn't do something soon. And what is happening at the federal government level is just, by its own admission, by the Treasury's admission, by the CBO's admission, is not sustainable.
So what are one of the consequences?
The consequences are the complete crumbling of the foundation of the United States economic system. And we have been privileged to be at the center of the global financial universe for nearly 80 years, and people just take that as a given because it's all we've known. But I feel like the British who were in that position before us probably felt the same level of invincibility as probably did the Dutch before them. But us no longer having that credibility, people no longer taking the U.S. backed on the full faith of the government that's supposed to back our dollars, means a decreased quality of life for the U.S. on sort of a best-case scenario. And a worst-case scenario is massive hyperinflation that wipes out everything. So this is a very, very serious issue that affects you. It affects your legacy. And again, the financial literacy and this feeling of invincibility, because we have been so privileged to be through this prosperous time, and that we can't see anything else if we don't look for cues in history and look frankly at the very obvious data in front of us. They're just catastrophic.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the money that we have in our possession that the government lets us keep to spend as we see fit, more or less. The Judas kiss that Biden and Yellen have offered the banking system, our banking system is fine. When they say that, it makes me very nervous. You recently penned a piece over at Glenn Beck's outlet, The Blaze, about the banking system and address the anxiety, the understandable anxiety that people have about whether or not they should keep their cash in our nation's banks.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really fair question, and I think it's a question of looking at short-term issues versus long-term issues. I do get lots of people who email me, and right now this has been one of the biggest questions that I've been getting. So if you have your cash in a traditional bank or credit union and you are within the FDIC limits, then for the short-term duration, you should be okay. If you're not sure, you should call your financial institution. If you're in a fortunate position where you have money that is uninsured, or maybe you have a small business, you might want to be moving accounts around, whether it's within the financial institution or at other financial institutions, to make sure that every single dollar is covered. It's really, really important to do that now. So I think from a short-term duration, that's fine. I think from a medium to long-term duration, though, what we've been talking about is, what's going to happen with the dollar? Is the purchasing power of the dollar going to continue to be destroyed? It's kind of looking like that. Or even worse, one of the things that I researched very heavily for You Will Own Nothing is a central bank digital currency, or a CBDC, which is basically a fully trackable, programmable, but unlike crypto, a completely centralized currency. So basically it would be like having a dollar with a microchip in it, and anywhere you went, the government could, if they decided to, say, well, Dan and Amy, you guys have had too many burgers this month, and burgers are bad for the economy, so I'm sorry, we just can't let you have another one.
Right.
And I think that's the concern from a long-term standpoint, and you pulling your dollars out of the bank, if that system takes over, or if the dollar depreciates to a point where you're not getting any value from it, those are different issues, and you pulling your dollars out of the bank doesn't protect from those. Those are the kinds of things where you have to think about what's a different form factor that I can use for a store of value or a medium of exchange that is going to fulfill those purposes in the medium to long term. So I think that the short term decision and the medium to long term decision is a different calculus.
That's the kind of decisions like, do I want to be able to buy a gas stove if I want to without government oversight? Do I want to be able to buy a dishwasher because they're coming for dishwashers now after they've come for the stoves, or they're beginning to? Those sorts of things where you've got government interventions potentially because of the trackability of digital currency.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge issue, and then the combination with technology where they can track everything and have access, and frankly, in some cases, rent you services. Maybe it's okay, it has a gas component, but you need an app in order to use that gas component, and once you've used enough for the month, and they're just going to go ahead and shoot it down. And it may sound very silly or conspiratorial, but similar things have happened. That happened, I think it was in Colorado, where people signed up for this rewards program with their energy company and had a smart thermometer, and then all of a sudden there was an electric grid issue and there wasn't enough electricity, and they just shut those people down because they opted in so that they could get some rewards, whatever that means. That doesn't seem like a good reward to me, but apparently they thought that was fantastic. So these kinds of things coming out of the decisions and the mandates from COVID, things that we all thought seemed silly or conspiratorial 5 years ago should not seem that way anymore.
She is Carol Roth, former investment banker, entrepreneur, author of You Will Own Nothing, Your War with a New Financial World Order and How to Fight Back. It's available for pre-order, the places you pre-order it, like I suppose Amazon. Releases July 18th. You Will Own Nothing is Carol Roth's new book. Pick it up. Carol Roth, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
More Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Dennis Prager here, and now is the time to sign up for our trip to Israel this fall. Mike Gallagher and I are headed back to Israel this October. Don't miss the Stand with Israel tour with our trusted partner, Inspiration Cruises and Tours. We'll visit amazing places in Israel, sure to profoundly inspire you with every step. Visit standwithisraeltour.com, standwithisraeltour.com, or 855-565-5519.
Newsmax is conducting an urgent poll asking if Tucker Carlson should be on Newsmax with a primetime show.